Hey guys, JJ Racaza. I'm here at the Tactical Hyve headquarters. We're gonna talk about dry fire tips. The few things that I focus on when I'm dry firing is really simple. The draw, the reload, the transitions, and some sort of movement, my entries and my exit. Those four things are what I focus on when I'm dry firing. What I gotta remember is when I'm dry firing, I'm only focusing on the movement aspect of it. I'm making sure that the shooting part of it is not affected adversely when I'm doing my dry fire. I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more later. First thing I want to talk about is the draw. The draw, the big thing about draw is having your index points checked. There are two types of draw. There's a scoop draw, what you'll see some people will already have some sort of pre-index in their holster and they'll come right up as one motion. And there's also a snatch draw, which is my style of draw, which I let my hands relax at sides and I'll come into the gun and then pull it out and snatch it out of the holster. So the scoop and the snatch. What I'm gonna talk about today is the snatch, how I set up for it. So here's how I set up my draw. When I dry fire, the first thing I do is I get myself in position. I've already gotten my holster rigged up together where I want it to be. Then I get into my index points. You can see I'm already checking it right now because I'm going to draw right next to the camera. From here, I get my setup and then I'm gonna go right for it. I'll do a little slow motion draw to kind of feel where it's at. And once I have that, I immediately will go right for the speed. So I wanna make sure that I'm going for speed right away, because if I'm going fast, if I'm comfortable at going fast, and I'm able to do this 100 times in a row without any kind of mistake, like that one right there was a mess up there because I didn't really set up my index. I will go back and review that and go, all right, I have to set up correctly. Then I will always have that clean stroke. You can see, and you can even hear the sound difference between the one before this and the one that I just did just now. The way you draw the gun should be a good straight linear pattern towards the target, right? So I'm gonna focus on my draw. On my draw also, what I'm working on is the small indexes. I'm gonna talk about them now. The first index is my setup, where my forearm hits the bottom of my mag well. That allows me to be able to get this perfect second index point with my hand high on the grip of the gun. The second index point is literally when my thumb touches the top of the slide here, and then from there is where I will actually strike the bottom of the trigger guard to move the gun and aid the gun to get to the end point faster. So what you'll see there in slow motion is this, boom, and I'll hit it right around there to help my one hand going up, essentially helping it all the way to the finish line. So now in full speed, it looks something like this. And you can see at this point, I've already gotten my finger in the trigger guard. And at a certain point, once my sight starts to line up, I will start to prep my trigger and I will separate the shooting part of it, which is pulling the trigger, completely separating away from my movement. Things to avoid when you're dry firing is this, and this is what I see a lot out there. You'll see this a lot. People will immediately pull the trigger and they'll trick themselves into seeing what a good sight picture is. So what they're essentially working on is responding to a bad stimulus, which is a semi-good sight picture, and they're kind of faking themselves and telling themselves or lying to themselves that that was a good enough sight picture. What that ends up developing is what happened to me a long time ago, is that you end up developing what's called a subconscious reaction to a stimulus. So now the second I see or get to this point, I've developed this since I'm doing this thousands and thousands of times. I've developed this sort of reaction that by the time I get to around this point, I see some sort of red, I have to shoot. And it becomes a reaction as opposed to a conscious decision to shoot the gun. And that's what I want you to separate the shooting from your movement. When I'm dry firing, my full dry fire is literally focused on my movement. And then when I see a shot, I will make the shot as perfectly as possible. And I'm deciding when to shoot that. So when I put a timer, like a par style, 1 second par time, my goal is to get to the target in less than 1 second, to do everything I need to do, process the sights perfectly, and that's when the timer goes off, and that's when I'm racing, is to get to the target, not necessarily racing to the timer to pull the trigger. I pull the trigger whenever I want to pull the trigger because it's a conscious decision that I want to make, not a subconscious reaction that I'm trying to develop. One more thing, guys, I want to add about the draw. When you're working on your draw, whether it's for speed or whether you're working on surrender or whether you're working on any kind of other draw, the one thing that I want to add to you guys is that when you actually pull the trigger, whether you're doing a double action, single action gun, as soon as you pull that shot and make that shot, don't just sit there and pin the trigger and then relax and be done with it. The shooting is not done until you actually cycle that trigger. The more you do this and come back to the holster and just pull the trigger once, and then do it again, and then come back and pull the trigger once, what you're doing there is developing that bad habit where you're just drawing and you're just gonna learn to pin the trigger to the rear. What you have to learn is to move correctly. Again, when you're dry firing, you have to cover all aspects. You gotta learn to move correctly. Once I get you to move correctly, then you can learn how to shoot correctly. One of the biggest things about and biggest faults about that I see in dry fire is people do this a lot, as I just showed you. The correction to that is I want you to focus on my trigger finger is when I pull the trigger, I will immediately reset and prepare for the next shot as if I'm going to fire it, but I'm not going to fire it. So not only am I working on the correct movement of what my finger should do right as soon as I fire the gun, but I'm also working on what's called the follow through, which is super important, right? A lot of us miss that point. So now to actually showcase that entire draw, it would look something like this. And since it's a double action, single action, I will stay within that window before I prep it. And if I have to fire another shot, if I'm gonna fire 2 shots, I will break the shot, reset, prep, break the shot, reset and prep, break the shot. And I'll know that I'm moving correctly because I'm staying within this window. I'll know that I move incorrectly with a double action, single action is because I will end up recycling and reactivating the double action trigger. So that tells me that if I have to fire this gun, that means I'm working too far away, resetting my gun, where in reality, all I have to do is learn how to stay within this window. So if I can train that here, I'm training that in real world as well, as if when it's a live gun, when it's actually firing. So again, covering all angles with the draw, learning to prep that trigger, breaking the shot, reset and prepping, and finishing before I come back to the holster. Just making sure you cover all angles. All right, guys, whether you're carrying from concealed carry or whether you have a race rig or an outside the waistband holster, how to get a sub-second draw is fairly easy. There's 3 steps to the draw, right? The first step, the old way, and this is the way I learned, is both hands simultaneously move. The second step is meet and greet, and the third step is full presentation, right? And then after that, it's just shooting, like pulling the trigger and all that stuff. So in regards to that, each and every single step is an opportunity for you to either gain or lose time. It depends on what you do and how you react. So the trick for me to how to develop that is to set your timer at 0.2 seconds if you can. 0.2 seconds will elongate the initial buzzer, which I want you to chase to get to this position with a perfect grip already. Gun's already kind of coming out, but not necessarily in 0.2 seconds. So you're beating and chasing the buzzer before it actually ends. So what you're working on here is your reaction time to the buzzer and the confidence to be able to go as fast as you can, just like that, with a perfect grip already, right? Onto the gun and from a hand to the gun. Second step is going from here to here. And I need you guys to do that in about 0.4 seconds. So from here, so now you set up your part time. Once you do this about 10, 20 times of just learning how to get into that and hitting it as hard as you can, and you can see how aggressively I'm going for it. And every single one of them, you can see that my grip was basically perfect, 9 out of 10 times, right? So with that said, once you do the 0.2 second on the first step, elongate that next drill or that next timer to 0.4 seconds. And I want you to go in about 0.4 seconds to go from here to meet and greet where you're already in this established, let's call a high compress ready, step 2 on your draw. So eventually it'll look like this, right? In slow motion, it looks like this, but eventually in speed, in a half second, I want you to be able to get into this where the grip's already perfect and you're already setting up for not even necessarily tight yet, but you're already setting up for the full presentation. So now the part time that you go after is while you're here is 0.5, right? So from here to here is about 0.5 seconds. And from there, now I want to work on the step 3. I want to be able to learn how to not drive my gun and slam it into the stop zone or to the 100%. I want to be able to throttle that back and land correctly on target, not crash on target. And what I'm going to do is chase, and now I want to get to the full extension in about 0.8 seconds. So essentially, the way it works is from here to here is really fast. Right here is where I start to squeeze into the gun. And when I squeeze into the gun, that will naturally slow down my movement and essentially which allows me to land on target as opposed to crash on target. So now eventually it looks like this. I'm fast here, aggressive here, squeeze. And that's where my 100% is. Some people's 100% is out here. Mine's just a little bit back. It's all technique at that point and preference. So you're gonna see it now. In 0.8 seconds, what I will do is throw my gun as hard as I can all the way to target, and I'll make corrections if I make a mistake. And that was pretty solid. I saw my dot exactly where I needed it to be. The more you dry fire, the easier it is to point a gun. One of the biggest advantages I have over other people is that where my eyes go, if I point at something, my dot is 9 out of 10 times going to be on the target, if not within inches on the target that I'm looking at. So that's the ability for me that I gained through dry firing all these years. So that's a huge advantage, whether I'm transitioning from target to target or drawing into one target. All right, guys, now that we finished the draw, once I do my draw outs and warm up on that, I go right into reload. So the first thing I do really in my dry fire is just focusing on learning the movement and continuing the draw, but now adding the reload into the entire process. And I'm just adding the reload. Simple as that, where I draw 1, reload 1. And you can see right now I'm not dropping mag, and that's really for efficiency purposes. But what I want you to understand that even though I'm not dropping a mag, I am not skipping a step. Everything that I'm doing that I need to do in order to drop a magazine, to flick the safety up, if I need to flick the safety up, I will do in each step. So now I'm gonna showcase when I drop the mag, the movement is the same thing. Nothing changes except this time around, I actually drop the mag. So again, in slow motion, what I do in my dry fire is I don't drop a mag because I make sure I don't skip a step. I will go in here, and when people say, oh, you're creating a bad habit, it's really not, because I'm not skipping a step. As I come back, I will depress the magazine release, I will flick my safety up, get the magazine in, flick the safety down, and come back on. And that's because I have a frame-mounted safety. So I flick the safety up for my own safety reason. You don't have to do that. That's just something that I've done since I was a kid. So with that said, in regards to efficiency, my goal is to get numbers in. As long as I don't skip a step, my reload will not develop bad habits just because I'm not dropping a mag into the bag or into the floor. Imagine I'm trying to do 200 reloads, 150 to 300 reloads a night. If I keep dropping this mag, that's about 300 stiff deadlifts that I'd have to do over and over. I don't want to do that. Basically, I'm just working on efficiency, getting the gun up, reload, and coming right back on. I'm working on movement, I'm working on my index. Biggest thing about reload, a lot of you guys that make that mistake of fumbling here or there, is pay attention to how your elbow, since we're doing speed reloads, pay attention to how your elbow will flare out, because if it stays flared out, this angle will not be correct. But watch the angle change when I just put my elbow down. See how the gun and the magazine line up all of a sudden? But if my angle is flared out, I'd have to do small muscle adjustment in order for this mag to go in cleanly. But instead of doing this wrist thing that we talked about earlier on how you set up your gear, just drop that elbow. And you can see now the magazine and the gun is gonna be in the right angle together. There's different topics of whether reloading up here or reloading down here. They're both the same thing. Just some people will talk about tactics and this and that. I just believe that's just technique. It's just up to you and what you can execute consistently and quickly. Because ultimately, if I can do it in sub-second, whether I do it from here or up here, it really doesn't matter. The goal is to do it fast, efficiently, consistently. The next topic of discussion in regards to dry fire that I work on while I'm dry firing in my 15, 20, 30-minute routine is transition. And all that is now is I would just work on top of just the draws and reload, now we'll just add a transition into it. So now I'm gonna go pick a target and then another target where I'm learning how to pull a trigger and work the timing of getting my eyes to lead the way, picking the next spot, breaking the shot, and maybe I will do another reload and repeating the entire process of the transition. So now, not only have I added another concept or another step, another threshold of failure, I'm just continually to build into what I've been working on. First it was a draw, and then the reload, and now I'm doing the transition. So now all I'm doing when I'm transitioning from target to target is to learn the timing that as soon as the shot breaks, my eyes is already leading to the next target, picking the next position or target area before I prep my trigger. And I'm also working the movement of my gun, of my trigger. So if I'm picking the corners of this target, I want you guys to pay attention to my trigger. As I break the shot, my eyes lead the way, my gun resets and preps just before it gets there. So I'm moving correctly. Everything that I would do as if I was shooting a live round. Not just sitting there, pinning the trigger to the rear and then reset and prepping once I get to the target, because that's too late, that's inefficient. Or firing and then finger off the trigger completely, coming to the next one, and then before prepping the trigger. So I'm always working on moving correctly because that's essentially the point of dry firing. Learning to work my timing on transition, meaning my eyes and my gun move together, except my eyes will get there first and my gun will just be right behind it. Also, I'm paying attention to where my sights are. As soon as I pull the trigger, how am I working my peripheral transition on my peripheral vision to seeing my sights as it's coming into the target, not only seeing it when it lands on target. Because there's a difference between when you're reacting to the sights when it gets there versus seeing it on the way coming in. All right, so proactive versus reactive. I'd rather be proactive in any part of my shooting, and that's when I can start doing what's called predictable shooting or predictive shooting, because I can start identifying where the sight could be and start identifying that just before it gets on target itself. The last thing I'm gonna talk about is a little bit of work on entries and exits, right? I'm gonna just work on not necessarily running around the room. I'm just working on how I get into position, what my gun looks like, how my footwork needs to be to settle my sights quicker. The quicker my sights settle, the cleaner my technique is in my feet, the sooner I can shoot a good shot. So in regards to that, the first thing I'm gonna do is just work on entering to my left side. So literally all I'm doing is just taking, as you can see, marks on the floor. I'm just gonna take a step and draw at the same time and paying attention to the movement and how my dot is landing on target. And seeing if I can clean that up as best as I can, right? By working the footwork as best as I can, staying low, loaded with my legs, or is it better if I come straight up? And by coming straight up, you guys already know the answer that that's not the way to actually shoot, because now there's another added movement that I have to account for consistency. Then once I do the left side, I'll do the right side as well, and seeing what positioning my feet should be in regards to the movement, to how my sights are landing on target. And you can see now that on the left side, I led with my left foot, my gun was coming up, and then I stayed on my left side, my weight shifting there. I don't go back 50-50, I stay on one side. The same thing happens when I go from left to right. Now that I'm coming in with my right foot, my gun comes up and my weight will stay on the right foot, and that's how my stance will have to be in order for efficiency. I'm not always gonna look for this perfect shooting stance. I'm gonna look for efficiency where I can still operate from, and this is still gonna be good and fast, because if I wait for the 50-50, that's another movement that I have to account for. Entries and exits, very simple. I work on coming into position, and then once I'm done starting in the middle where I cover both sides, then I work on exiting, going to the right, and then exit going to the left. Something simple as this. I'll do a slight little shuffle, or I'll do a big step. And that's it. And then once I do that, I work on how my sights are landing, when my gun needs to come down to come up, or when do I just get my gun to transition all the way across. Depending on the scenario that I've created in my head, that's the things that I focus on. Always, it comes down to how my sights are settling on target, where my eyes are going, and what the sights is doing as I'm rolling into that final position. Other than that, guys, if you guys have any comments or tips that you think that would help you out, come comment below. See you guys on the next one.